Thank you. And thanks to our friends in Zoom as well. Appreciate you all being here. From now until the end of our term, we will be essentially covering the end of the 14th and 15th centuries. And I thought about how interesting that today we start on one Richard and we will end in another. Go, in other words, from Richard II to Richard III. May I still do this? Okay. The interesting part to me was the thought that as I was reading an article, which was in a medieval journal in 1942. Can you believe that? Yes, and it's always interesting to think what people would say. And it's like in 1942, the author was suggesting that many educated people didn't know the distinctions between Richard II and Richard III. And I thought, well, now I'm sure they wouldn't know there was a King Richard. So I think they probably knew a lot more than today. Am I saying a decline in historical knowledge? Yeah, but they still eat those Brussels sprouts. I can tell you that. They just don't know the history of their own nation. Richard II, though, is a very distinct individual from Richard III, as we will see. However, not only do they have the same name, they have something else in common that many of you will love, including a Zoom friend who may have these works in those cliff notes that you've heard me speak of before in a voice of censure, let us say, because these were both subjects of Shakespeare's plays. And many of you will remember this fondly from literature classes, or not so fondly, but you will remember them nonetheless. And you studied them the night before the test. Oh, no one here. But the idea was seriously that there have been no more Richards. There ain't a Richard IV. There's a Richard II, Richard III. They will both have, shall we say, unpleasant partings from this life. They will be, however, very, very different figures, but very important to this particular period. The one we're speaking of is, of course, the last of the kings we call Plantagenet, because after Richard II, while the kings are of the royal family, it's as if you're not from the direct line. And that's okay. I mean, you're still royalty. I mean, those of you who keep up with the current royalty know that Anne has children, the princess, and so forth. But we just don't think about those folks. They get the opportunity to live in privacy, don't they? Whereas when you are direct line, everybody's got to watch you. That's the nature of it. And the case of these Plantagenets means that with Richard, who was married but without any children, he's the end of the line, the direct line. And from there, we go to new lines and new opportunities for the study that we all so enjoy. And am I having troubles? Am I doing it wrong?
You're doing everything right.
Tree study, yes. This is the kind of Arbor Day that anybody would want, right? Who was in history. Look at those branches. Get a load of twigs. I mean, they're everywhere. And it's like, could you really want more? No. You might want less, but I sort of wanted you to get a picture of all of the people that you could say are involved in this. And you say, well, there's our Richard II. And you see him right under his father, the Black Prince. His mother is his father's first cousin. That happens. And there he is. And we'll talk about his two wives, that is Richard II's. And then, of course, the fruitfulness of Edward III and his wife. The reason you do not see any females there is not because they didn't exist, but because of their marriages, they are not part of the succession line here. Only males will be. So you see all these people, the Black Prince's younger brothers, and of course there's one there who is very important to our story. I believe I mentioned last time he was born in the city of Ghent, so we know him as John of Gaunt. And he will be very, very important to our tale. Very close to both Joan, his sister-in-law, and his nephew, or charge, if you want to call him that. And you see there is the Duke of York. We all know that title. And of course, the Duke of Clarence. And those were interesting people, but as we will find out, they will be very important in the succession, even though they themselves did not become kings. It's like just by being and having descendants, they become important to our story. But there's our little boy, Richard, who would be born, well, his father died in 1376. So he was born about 1367. He was a big roaring 1-0 when he became king in 1377. If you remember yourself in the 5th grade, and you're thinking, I don't know if I was ready to rule a regime at that particular time. And I don't think he was either. But anyway, the story goes on. And how long does the story go? It gets us till the end of the term. Yes. So you don't need any more trees. You're going to get them. But this is one big tree. And there's Richard III. Keep going down. There you go. And all the way to, yes, Henry VIII, Tudor time. And for this class, the spring. So, he is clearly the boy king. And it's difficult to understand, even if we want to do what I was telling you all last week, they call psychohistory, and they try to interpret, because he no doubt had many issues, as they say nowadays. And he certainly had lots of people to give him advice. I don't think he was at he's not even at the teenage stage. I mean, he's somewhere between young childhood and teen. He was very close to his mother. He seems to have been very close to his uncle. Frankly, if you want to be dull about it, and I do in this case, Richard's parents actually loved each other. What a strange situation, right? The Black Prince and Joan, they actually have letters to which, in English, which are very affectionate, 14th century English. And so it's not to say that at least at the beginning of his life, he must have enjoyed affection. I think I said before, he was born in Bordeaux. So he spent time there, and his father's this great hero. I mean, Dad, no, you can just call me the Black Prince, just like everybody. I mean, it's like you're in the next room, there's this national hero, my father. And so, that's got to be very interesting. But since we can't get Richard on the couch, let us just appreciate the fact that when his father's dead, in addition to John of Gaunt, he has other, shall we call them, lean and hungry uncles. Because they can't be king, but it's not like they're missing anything. They've got plenty, so don't worry about them. It's not like they need an allowance or anything like that. They are doing fine. Thank you very much. It's just, I hate to say humans are just greedy, but I will. And I think these uncles it's always this sort of desire for power and control. John of Gaunt had enough, as we're going to see, because he's really the most interesting figure to me in this tale. He had a lot of projects, as we say at collegiate stage, extracurricular activity. So he had a lot going on. But so did the other uncles, but it never kept them away from trying to influence what was going on at court. And you think, what's a 10-year-old child doing at court? That's a very interesting question, isn't it? Maybe you just say, well, we're going to have a nap in a few minutes, but right now we just need, maybe we can have chocolate milk and get up, or whatever you do with people that age. But all of this is to say that I think maybe his mother and John of Gaunt were in charge just to make sure that these other folks didn't take over, because there was that risk. And we got to think about time here, because remember, he's going to last until he is 32 years old. Very young. I don't know. Think about when you were 32. I mean, you think I'm just starting, and that's it. He's lived. Check it out. So yes, it was an exciting period in which he lived. I'll give him that, but not necessarily a happy one. I mentioned the family. I mentioned the uncles, but I haven't mentioned other terms we associate with him. So let me do that. One of the issues that he's going to have is the matter of what they call in the books natural advisors. Now, the natural advisors are like his uncles and other VIPs. But like most of us, he has personal favorites. And when you're king, even a 13-year-old that's not always good, because people want position, influence, whatever it calls. So when your own uncles are jealous, that's kind of sad, but that's the way it is when you have power. Now, if he'd been an ordinary young boy, teenager, no, who cares? Go play, whatever. But when you're king of England, everybody's around you, and he had his favorites. And sadly, we all know that sometimes people take advantage of other people, and undoubtedly these people were using him for their own purposes. Dare I call them, one of my favorite words, sycophants. Yes. You can just imagine the young student who's got a C+. Oh, sir, I've never heard lectures so profound. Yeah, suspect those people. They are wicked. Okay. Yeah. So do not give them sainthood. You better watch out for what I say. Yeah, you just can't trust people like that. But yes, they're all around him. And of course, they get favors, they get opportunities, and dare I say, like people you can read about in the paper today, they're going to be guilty of all kinds of corruption. Doesn't it sound like a very old story, graft and whatnot, and contracts, and you think, oh, they did that back then? Oh, yes. If there's any way to cheat, they will discover it. It was there in the 14th century, just like the 21st. So that is for sure. Now, for those, and I know at least one, who are Louis XIV lovers, you see that term and you may feel a sense of resentment. How dare you refer to one of your rulers with the sacred absolute monarch that people in my cult call Louis XIV. Well, that's why I put it in quotation marks, so I could do this inoffensively. He dreamed of being an absolute monarch. Richard II was no Louis XIV. He may have dreamed about it, had fantasies about it, but there is not going to be an English Louis XIV, I promise you. They try, they want it. Oh, isn't there with that old Broadway song, To Dream the Impossible Dream? Yeah, I mean, they can do that all they want. And you realize the bases for monarchy in England are too well laid out by this time. Under his grandfather, the Parliament, no matter how much these kings may resent it and this and that, the other, they have to kind of gulp and say, oh, okay. It's not like we like it, but except we're going to have to deal with it. But absolute monarchy is one of those things that, as he gets older, like in his teens, or maybe early 20s, woo, really aging. And then he's saying, someday these old nobles can't tell me what to do. I'll be all powerful. Oh, yeah. I mean, I really believe that. And as he does so, of course, his feelings about Parliament, even, and you know how they will talk to him. May it please your great majesty. You are so wise, you are so wonderful, but we think you ought to do this and that and the other. But even that sort of gets under his craw. He really does. And I think as he gets older, late 20s, he basically wants to gain more and more power, and it will be his downfall. But that, as we will see, is another story. However, we bear that all in mind. He's a family man. His first wife, well, just to tell Richard II stories for a second, he was actually happily married, like his mother and father. I think it's nice. I usually tell stories of people who run around and corrupt and bad. And so I love a nice story sometimes. The story of his first marriage was a marriage to the daughter of the Holy Roman Emperor, and you don't get any higher than that. And yes, Frank, Anne of Bohemia. Go, Big B. Yes, Anne of Bohemia. And you think, what's a nice Bohemian doing in England? Well, I guess she had to take some English classes, but this was a pretty big deal in terms of diplomatic, because sad to say, as much as we love the French, Germans and English sometimes have a little Francophobia. And so it seems that the emperor and the English monarchy could join together this way by the marriage of the emperor's daughter, Anne, to Richard. And how odd is it that they actually fell in love? I say this is one of those miracle marriages, because I can count them on one hand, several fingers, in which, like William the Conqueror and his wife, Adelaide. Yeah, they're just not that many. But Anne was very popular. She was known as Good Queen Anne. She must have taken some crash courses in English, and she got out. They had no children. She died of plague later on, but before him. So he would be remarried for political reasons. The second time to a French woman, but due to the circumstances of life, the marriage was neither consummated nor there any children. So that's the end of the line. You say, but what about affairs or infidelity? None. I'm telling you. This is why it's taking me time to tell it. I'm so excited to think about, because this is so strange in terms of royal marital history. You just don't hear these kinds of things, but I think it's really nice. Go ahead, Jenny.
Why was it never consummated? Did she never come over?
Oh, she was just a child. I'll talk more about that. Yeah. I'm gonna. Oh, believe me, there were major reasons. But in fact, we know another interesting thing, and I'm going to show it to you. So don't be shocked. Yes, the handkerchief. Richard II had the first handkerchief. And that's really nice to think about. Of all the Dillards, Gaffers, Belks, all the places where, and you think, he was the first? What did they do before? Don't ask. It's ugly. It's nasty. You don't want to think about that. We just have to think that Richard II was, in many ways, somewhat genteel for that period. He enjoyed shock reading and education and all that sort of thing. So I'm trying to be very positive because, he had a very tough life. Frank's already mentioned to us the Peasants' Revolt, and we're about to get there. And we understand then when you're 10 years old, this is not, and your father's already dead. And you've got these uncles that are, you really have questions about life, I would think. So all of that is to say that in his young life, he had some very, very difficult times. The young wife, second wife, was a result of the fact that he was, how do we say it nowadays, financially strapped. Isn't that the way when the governments don't have any money or people? Well, you could definitely say that about his government. I think Edward III's regime had pretty well wiped it out thanks to the war with France. And Richard II could not get the money. I mean, there's so many of these times when they want more, but they can't get it. And so they can't get it because, well, you want the money, then here's what we want. So he doesn't want to have to give them anything. So basically he says, well, we'll just take a little break. And part of that little break, of course, and you know how it is in the Middle Ages, when in doubt, get married. You got a princess stored away, and it's just like an ice cream store, number 32, come on out. Yeah, it's sad but true that this is what's going to happen here. And we never forget the big D, dowry. Yes, because as nice as the second wife is going to be, and her name was Isabella, that was a very popular name. I know when if I were to go out on the streets now and I said Isabella, they would think of Spain in the 15th century. Am I right? If I were to go to your campus. But in this case, Isabella Valois was the oldest daughter of the French king. And she was 7 or 8. But he was 25 maybe. So they both thought they had plenty of time. And so the main thing at that point, I'm sorry?
6.
6 what?
She was 6.
Oh,
What did I say?
7 or 8.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry. Okay. But anyway, they were young. And so the idea was that she had plenty of time, as did he. But at that very point of marriage, it was really a question of the dowry, wasn't it? Because you don't say, well, maybe we'll see if they have children or the marriage lasts. No, the dowry comes first. So he wanted that dowry, and so that started being paid off, and that really helps out with the old bills. So that is in part what happens here, because there's still some bad feelings, sad to say, between the English and the French. I don't want to shock you, but just so you know that. Here I go again. Now, you really got to be an observer of public television and think back. Okay, I'm going to give you lots of hints here. Jimmy Carter or Gerald Ford was president at this particular time. These are little hints for you, for those who like nostalgia questions. But when I saw these two together in a production of Richard II, I thought, this is unbelievable for PBS people. And you will enjoy this if you can get it. This production of Richard II, you've got, does anybody know who's playing John of Gaunt, the older one? Yeah. That's exactly right. Oh, did you say that, Dennis? John, yeah. And does anybody know who's playing Little Richard? Not at all. Yeah, that's it. That was 1977. 1970s. I know I had to have some help too, don't feel. Yeah, I mean, and then suddenly I said, oh yeah, 1977. And again, the idea of these figures, and you could almost say father, son. But that relationship would have many areas that we could call, I guess, troubled, because John of Gaunt was a very powerful man, very powerful man. And he had a variety of interests too. It's not as if to say that John of Gaunt, who was like almost semi-king, and he had so many adventures and other interests, like being king of Castile through his wife by virtue of his second marriage. Oh, yeah. He was having that iron in the fire too. And then he's trying to maintain things for Richard. But he's got his own son who's, let's just say, having lots of problems. So he's got a full plate. But I think it's fair to say that John of Gaunt played a very, very significant role in the life and career of Richard II. I don't know how much Richard appreciated it all the time, because sometimes we love our elders, but sometimes we wish they would let us do what we wanted to. So I think that's probably the case of him. But anyway, I thought that was funny to pull that out of public television lore, because that has been quite a long time, because I don't think John Gielgud has been with us for a long time. But Derek Jacoby, he's still going strong.
I haven't seen him that young before. I was like,
I know. Are you shocked
when I kept looking
to
at
think of him?
like Derek Jacoby, but I don't know what's in
I mean, think of 1977. I mean, that was quite a long time ago. And yeah, so yeah. He's quite shocking, isn't it? Because yeah, we could do a PBS special right here, some of the actors that we know and love. And yeah, thank you. So now we're ready for the Peasants' Revolt, which sounds like I'm doing this like erratically. Why do we go from uncle and son suddenly into the Peasants' Revolt? Well, we don't have control over events that way. He became king in 1377, and this revolt begins 4 years later. Isn't that wild? And you think, wow, ninth grade, yeah. Going to be a teenager. I'm going to be a cool dude. Yeah, but he was thought of as just being a child. When you read the chronicles, oh yeah, you're cutesy wootsy, I guess, but at least he was just kind of described that way in the sources. But that said, this is one of the great events in peasant history, because frankly, there are just not that many that we know about. And that's probably not because they didn't happen. It's simply that chroniclers didn't mention them, because you're not going to find a lot of chroniclers who are going to say, wow, this is great. The peasants have gone on a rampage. We are really excited. Happy day. No. This is a very, very naughty thing. So say the chroniclers. And you say, well, these chroniclers must be aristocrats. Au contraire. Their parents could be peasants. These are monks and nuns. But these peasants are guilty of grave sin. Yes, Jenny, thank you for that. You understand they are disrupting the divine order. So, is this bad? It is très bad, as they say in France. Yes. Very, very. It is a very serious affair. So no one, as we say in modern journalism, would give them good press. It's like would say it's high time someone stood up to the elites. No, I mean, that's what you're supposed to be doing. But understanding, we have to read between the lines. We understand that there are many causes of this great peasants' revolt. They do not revolt just because it's another year and we thought we're tired of farming and so we just like to revolt. No, there are specific circumstances. And if you think about 1381 and you remember the beginning of the Black Death in 1348, you're aware the Black Death doesn't go anywhere just because we're not at the beginning of this current business. It just seems to go on. And in many ways, we certainly don't want to be anything like the 14th century, but it's fair to say that while the Black Death, the bubonic plague, became less severe, it did not end. It continued episodically, shall we say. So all of this, as we are going to learn, will involve, of course, what should we call them? I guess the nice word would say leaders, cheerleaders, or we could call them demagogues, or what would they be called by the chroniclers? The damned. Wat Tyler and John Ball, another name is sometimes given, which may have been an alias for Wat Tyler, Jack Straw. In case you've ever heard that name, Jack Straw. But again, these are just people that apparently were real, and they were responsible for, in the areas of Kent and Essex, down south, beautiful lands that will be part of your tour. Because you're going to Canterbury and all through there. Yeah. And you can go to France after you finish your assignment. But all of this is to say that if these people go through these towns and farming areas and sort of talk to the people who are already unhappy, irked, dissatisfied. I should have Roger here with me to give all the synonyms, but you get the idea, I suspect. And when we are talking about this London area and all beyond, can you imagine how huge that is? And we all think, whether you think Birmingham or Atlanta, Lord knows, Chicago, it just goes on and on and on, doesn't it? And that certainly was true for London. And it's like those areas of getting people who are already excited even more agitated. It's not like things had been good before. It's as if people accepted it, and now people are more inclined to act upon their discontent. Because this appeared to be an attack against good order, then those who led Richard's government, remember our little teenager, our little 14-year-old king, they decided that some radical actions would have to be taken. And you can only imagine the idea that peasants who normally are submissive and obedient are now acting in ways that seem dangerous, lawless, threatening. Oh, I mean, they would even commit acts against the clergy. Yes. I mean, you can't just say, hey, don't do that. I'm a bishop, okay? Because we have evidence that upper clergy like that, and you can imagine, don't pull out the abbot button with me. I mean, that cuts no slack. I mean, they are really, because remember, abbots and bishops are also great landowners. And so they symbolize all of the authority and power that these folks resent. Now, it's fair to say they're not serfs anymore. And you would say, well, that's great. Yeah, it is. But somehow moving up a little bit can sometimes just make it even worse. So it's fair to say that they are free, but they are hardly out of these terrible situations. It's fair to say that as they are demanding an end to serfdom, which technically was already over, they are demanding that they have their land free, that they be rid of all authorities other than that of the good king. And that is always interesting. They want Archbishop Canterbury, shoot. Archbishop York, you're out. Duke of York, dukes, earls, we have no need of you. We love our king. Nice little boy. But all of these other people, forget it. We want to have our lands. We want our rights. And I'm not sure they knew exactly what those rights were, but I don't think that anybody has sat down and written out, explained exactly these people who were not educated, obviously, what kind of rights they had and what kind of life they really wanted. I mean, it's not like there's some sort of Marxist blueprint of Eden in England or whatever you want to say. But whatever rights, they wanted the land free and they wanted more or less a better life than they had had before. They wanted, and you see hunting and fishing, and you think about that because I always like to remind people when you remember, some of you, King William II died in an unfortunate accident. I hear Frank with that laugh, and yes, it was sad. You remember, Frank? Very sad. It was very sad. They were a lot of mourning and sadness. Those early morning hunting parties, that happens, and you say he looks so much like a stag. Well, all of that is to say that the people of that level like to hunt and pass the time. And they did not want to share those opportunities with the lower classes. So when they hunted, you know, there'd be one of those signs, this area is reserved. No peasants need apply. So that's the idea. These folks say we should get to hunt, we should get to fish, we should do this, that, the other. And if you're a bishop or you're a lord, you would say, I don't think so. Sacre bleu. Is that what? Yeah. I mean, it's like, what a ghastly idea. I mean, I'm going to have to chug some tea to deal with the pain this is causing. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to think, but yeah, they want a fishing and hunting. I don't think they want anything articulate like, well, somebody to help. Yeah, money, or we want to get consultants in agricultural methodology or any of that. I mean, it's like, but they want the king. But they want the king, and I guess they keep the Pope around. He's in Rome, he don't bother us. But they want all these big shots in the church because you know what we want? We want that land, that church land. I mean, we don't want to offend God. No, it's not that. But those old clergy are mean, and but we love the church. We just don't like the clergy because they are kind of stingy. And they're not nice about the use of that land. They make them pay rents and things like that. So, have I done something? So, luckily, I'm not dependent on. Oh,
It's only a test.
okay, but I can go on.
Go for it.
Thank you. Oui.
Click on acknowledge. Yeah.
There we go. Thank you. That's it's wonderful to know smart people. Uh-oh.
I'm gonna do this to make
Okay.
something else stop.
Excellent. All right, back to what? They want all of that and they do it according to their own ideas. And remember, they have a resident clergy, or should I say ex-clergy. John Ball was in sort of like that television show, England's Most Wanted. Yeah, he had been in Canterbury's jail because he was going around spouting out ideas and ideas that the church didn't approve of. And when you're a clergy, I don't know if he might have been a thinly disguised Lollard. Yes. And Lollards are dangerous. So one of his ideas, which some of you have heard before, when Adam Delve and Eve Span, who was then the gentleman, and the idea of digging, delving, and Adam Delve, Eve Span, who was then the gentleman. In other words, there were no genteel people in the book of Genesis. We were all working. We were all out there getting dirty. No answers. And so the idea that he's trying to get at is what I guess we would call, how you like this for a biggie, Christian egalitarianism. Yeah, you like that. Yeah, that's the idea. So I don't want any of your fancy stuff. So don't come to me and saying, you got to kiss my ring, or I'm the bishop of this or the that of that. Nobody gets down to anybody. We're all just, we are the world, we are the children, all of that. Okay, danger, straight ahead. No. What would that do to the church, the Catholic Church? So now we understand he needed to be in the lockup, and apparently he'd gotten out on bail. I'm not sure, but I don't think John Ball's ideas were considered. Well, that's an interesting approach, Father. Thank you. No, we have to wait several centuries for the Jesuits, but so right now we are still at that stage that would be considered quite unacceptable. But he's saying this, so the chronicler said, in these particular group meetings with these peasants, because the peasants are disturbed, and I want to go more into that. Actually, what was happening is in some ways similar to the way many of us might view the present. Prices, employment was going up. And there was clearly a reason for that. The Black Death. There are fewer people. And that means that labor is more expensive. And if you are a peasant and have to work, you want it to be in a situation that it's worth your while. I mean, you don't want to have the same grind. I mean, you've suffered enough in the plague because you've lost so much family and all of the other personal tragedies. But in terms of the reality of the economy, people expect some improvements in their lives. And while much of the restrictions of serfdom had passed, some had been maintained. And one aspect, which will take us back to the 1980s, is the poll tax. Some of us will remember it, even if we were just sitting in front of a television. And it was just shocking to think that people could get as upset as they did. When we think of poll, we think of individuals. It's a tax on individual people. And it doesn't matter rich, poor, whatever you may be. The royal government of Richard was at basically Parliament's suggestion, because we understand Parliament was controlled by well-to-do people, nobility largely. So the poll tax was basically trying to put a lot of the national debt on ordinary people, because a poll tax would make ordinary people pay as much as the well-to-do people. I don't need to tell most of us we have a graduated income tax now, and we have non-taxable people as well. So obviously things have changed, but I think it was maybe 1987, but I may have that year wrong, when the Thatcher government ordered that poll tax. Boy, they were up in arms. And I'm sure it contributed to her downfall. In any event, that was the issue that may have precipitated the particular revolt that is talked about here under Richard II. As the story goes, they got this young king sort of primed to go out there and meet with the leaders and say, you know, I'm very sorry. I want to work with you. I love you very much. And of course, they're going like, we love you very much, you know, and all of that. But the truth of the matter is, as I think Frank indicated, I mean, there was no honesty in the negotiations. We sort of know that this is not going to come out well. As a matter of fact, we know that the Lord Mayor of London will actually slay one of the leaders of the revolt. And Richard's promises, and remember now, he's a low teen, 14. And or so. And he's saying in effect, yeah, it's all finished. No more surf, no more any of that. Just want love and peace and all that. So once that happens, then the peasants with their leader being slain, whether we say Wat Tyler or Jack Straw, whoever it was, the peasants began to run for cover. And whether or not it's true that now the royal leaders, including some of the king's uncles, I suspect, basically thought about going after the masses. They may not have done so right away. It's sort of like, we know where you are and we'll get you. And boy, they took what I think we can describe as bloody retribution. And they would go to the various areas. And you can hear this story when you go to the Tower of London. That'll be part of your trip too. Yeah. So the Disney World of London. Yeah. You got a lot on your plate. Yeah. So in any event, the idea was that, you know, the king is basically, as far as all of these grants and concessions, now saying, I was just teasing, but if you don't like it, what would you like to do about it? So it's, and I don't think it's going to affect his poll ratings. You know, it's like you know, how these politicians nowadays, I always consider, what's the latest poll? I don't think Dr. Gallup was working back then. So at the upper classes, the people whose opinion counts in terms of the monarchy, they think all this is just great. I mean, you know, in modern terms, when you read these accounts and you read about the slaughter of all these people and all the terrible things that happen, it seems really bad in our terms, but in their terms, it's understandable and necessary so that the peasants will know their place. And so you don't see these kinds of revolts again, I guess, until Martin Luther's time in Germany. But I'm not aware of seeing it so much in England. But I was just thinking about, believe it or not, Luther would say something very similar, put them down. They need to be controlled. And so, you know, like, they've got these issues and let's work with them. No, we've got to have authority and respect. So all of this is gone and the priest cannot claim clerical immunity. I think that's not going to work. All of that is over. And when that's over, it's absolutely amazing because, you know, people often say, well, what are the results of the peasants' revolt? And I'm saying none. It's like, if you want to see modern day British democracy resulting from the peasants' revolt in the 14th century, I don't see it. So you keep working on it. And when you got it, let me know. But yes, there will be changes. But this is just, should we call it previews of coming attractions? And this is, you know, a lot of those previews they show at movie houses, It's coming in a long time. I don't even know why they showed the preview. Because so that's kind of like this. It's not going to be anything like this until, God, 18th century, when you have kind of like peasants' rights and agricultural improvements and all the rest. Remember Jethro Tull? We never forget Jethro Tull. So now we are ready to move on. Understanding, of course, and the illustrations of the peasants' revolt and the mayor's slaying of Wat Tyler. And, you know, it's like an extemporaneous slaying. I mean, it's like, and could you imagine if you'd had a psychiatrist or grief counselor or whatever talking to Richard II about, gosh, kid, I guess you do have issues. I mean, now you've had this revolt that you are dealing with, and your father died when you were a little boy, and all of these things. But in any event, Richard II had definitely had, I would say, some exciting times in his young life. But as far as him personally, I would not think he had been greatly affected by it. However, he would be greatly affected by something else, and that would be Parliament. Because Richard II, as the years went by, and we're in all of 1386. So, you know, really, that's not that many years from the Peasants' Revolt, 5 years. Isn't that wild? But even in the 5 years, he and his coterie, entourage, what are you going to say, had been spending money and having quite a wonderful time. And so Parliament decided to take action. I don't know if it was so much a desire to protect honorable government, or maybe it was more they were jealous and resentful. I think the latter. That's why we have this wonderful Parliament, and the idea of impeaching and convicting. It had been done under his grandfather, but now with one of his cronies named Michael de la Pole. And he was a crony. He was not, shall we say, of the upper crust. He was just one of Richard's boys. And he had, as you see, royal chancellor, and now high crimes and misdemeanors. So, gee, he had to take an out-of-town trip after that wonderful Parliament. They never got a hold of him. Talk about England's most wanted. He got the next boat across the channel. Because if they'd gotten a hold of him, he'd be doing some hard time. And no consecutive terms. Consecutive terms. I mean, he would, there was no future for de la Pole. The graft and corruption and all the rest of it, greasy palms. All of this is to say, we're not quite ready to get at the young king himself, but we can get mighty close. Because when you go to your own royal chancellor and bring him down, and the king couldn't do anything. I mean, he was unhappy. I'm sure he didn't send a letter and thank him. I mean, it's like, yeah, this is really bad. I'm sure when I was that age, I probably would have brooded or maybe put on a little tantrum in my palace, you know, to all my people. I'm unhappy. I hate nobles, you know, and all of that. But the fact is, what are you going to do about it? Because you're not in a good position. Oh, I mean, they love it when you go out and kill peasants. That's fine. But not when we're talking about power and control. Got a real problem. So that was the end of Michael de la Pole as far as France is concerned. But France, as we all know, is a beautiful and large country. So I'm sure he had a nice time. And he knew French, so he was bilingual, so he was okay. Nothing to worry about there. Believe it or not, I don't know who got the idea of naming these parliaments, but wonderful parliament or merciless parliament now is like, how can we even do more? Oh boy. Now they're going to call it, we are going to bring direct accusations against the royal government. Notice we say we do it against the government. We don't do it against the king. But we know, and they knew, that's what they were really talking about. The appellants or accusers were accusing these people of royal authorities of, oh, my favorite U word, usurpation. We love usurpation because it's a question of royal authority versus noble authority, and they claim that their authorities are being taken away. This has nothing to do, of course, with democracy or the people's rights or any of that. So don't waste your tears. We're thinking of power struggle. So these appellants are basically resentful of the authority of the royal government, and they feel they are losing power. But they're doing this in the context of Parliament. So that's why they call it what it is, merciless, because they intend to bring down some of these ministers. And notice the year 1388. The people involved, and we all know that children grow up to be big boys sometimes, and that would certainly be true with John of Gaunt's son. John of Gaunt, by his first wife, who actually was the individual who brought him all of those Lancastrian lands. She had his children and then died. So that's how he could marry this Castilian and then go down south and try to work that out. And meanwhile, the children by the first wife were growing up, including his heir. And we're going to think about that heir next week, but the heir was called Henry Bolingbroke, Henry of Lancaster. And you think, did he and Richard get close? Close enough to killing each other, yeah. I don't know if it's jealousy. I mean, I don't know if Henry Bolingbroke, being the son of John of Gaunt, would have liked to have had more time with his father, or maybe I'm trying to be too family oriented here. Whatever the case, Henry, thanks to his father's adventures in Castile, which is a nice place to have adventures down south. Henry Bolingbroke, who's a young man, a peer of Richard, I mean, the age-wise. So he was very concerned that all of his powers and lands were going to be taken away by Richard. And remember, they're cousins. And Richard is the son of John of Gaunt. And John of Gaunt is the protector of Richard. So you can see why this would be so great in theater, these dynamics of the relationship. And I might say Anna Bohemia played a great role too, because she's loves her husband and she's the faithful one. And when she dies, he just really goes to pieces. He and Anna were very close and devoted to each other. But meanwhile, Henry Bolingbroke is thinking about his lands and his rights, and he loathes King, who happens to be his cousin. But that cuts no ice, does it? Even Thanksgiving. I always loved this picture when I saw this, because it depicts the dying John of Gaunt and King Richard paying his last visit to his uncle. John of Gaunt went on and on and on. I'm not saying that. And you remember last time I told you he finally got to marry his long last love, according to the novelist. Whether that's true or not, but she was third round. He had had a long time affair with her, and she had lots of children by him. And then he married her. Her name was Catherine Swinford. I think she was of the nobility. In any event, he continued to be interested in Richard, but he must have been torn between his son and his nephew, wouldn't you think? I mean, it's awkward to say the least. And then, of course, he'd been off on his Castilian adventure for a year or two. I mean, they don't think anything about, oh, I'll be a week or two and then I'll be back. Well, you just can't run over like we do on the airplanes. I mean, it's just, these are major trips when you were going from England and to Castile to fight for the royal authority. But by the late 1390s, John of Gaunt has returned. He will die in early 1399. And undoubtedly, it's clear that with John of Gaunt, shall we say, on his last leg, yeah, Richard feels freer to do what he wants. It's as if now Richard doesn't have to worry about what John of Gaunt thinks. So all of this means that he dies, and Henry, who will be exiled, is more or less in a position to do as he pleases. And Richard is happy as can be. I mean, I'm sure he's sad about his uncle, maybe. But you say, worry about money. Don't worry. I've got the dowry. Because remember, we miss our first wife, Anna Bohemia, miss her like crazy. But we got a new wife. We got the dowry. Full steam ahead. Things are looking great. I'll miss Uncle John a lot. But that Henry can stay in France. I could care less. He better stay in France if he knows what's good for him. So, seemingly, you notice I described this out of control. And by out of control, you think, how can a king go out of control? It's like you don't think you have anybody to answer to anymore. It's like a student once told me, if I were ruler, I would do just what I wanted. And I would say, and I can tell you, you wouldn't be there long because it just doesn't work that way. Even Louis XIV, I might add. But the idea is Henry came back, and as he did so, he would catch Richard in a position that was very difficult for Richard. Richard had actually been on a military campaign in Ireland, of all places. They had troubles, and you can understand there would be troubles a long time in Ireland until the 20th century, right? Maybe the 21st. But in any event, when Richard was unaware, he was caught in a very difficult situation by Henry and his forces. And what would happen was that he would be arrested. You say, how do you arrest a king? Well, because you are a king who is not acceptable anymore. You're so bad a king, you're going to be an ex-king. But right now, Henry is just trying to get his own rights, his lands, get himself established again, and understand that he's going to establish what is rightfully his. Only gradually, they tell us, did he start thinking, well, why don't I just become king? How silly that I should have to share. Meanwhile, Richard had been put for safekeeping in the Tower, an apartment, check in, but never checked out. As he was placed in the Tower, he was provided with encouragement at abdication. He was provided with documents that he needed to sign so that he could admit what a loser he was. It's like, we've got this, we have our whole, the British Bar Association, they've really been working up this document. They do, though, they get cross all those T's and dot all those I's. You know how they do in the documents, that's what we're paying for. And so you are a loser, L-O-S-E-R. You are bad, you are wretched. You don't deserve to be, I don't deserve to be king. Oh, you to be unbelievable. Started to read it to you, to get every word you can possibly think of. And see, and they're saying now, and we just need Richie, Richie, get it? We just need for you to sign it right here, and everything is going to be fine. We can get a nice dinner here, nice steak dinner or something special. But anyway, he was there in the Tower, and he was eventually encouraged successfully to abdicate. And when the abdication comes out, it's like, I give up your every right, but I don't do so without encouraging my successor to have all these rights, which will still belong to the crown. It's just me. I'm terrible. I'm wretched. Beat me. Yeah, over and over. So he got off, but I'm still in the Tower, still hanging out in the Tower, signed all the documents. And with that, it appears that Henry said, well, shoot, this throne is vacant. There isn't a king in England. So y'all do what you think is right. And then, of course, Parliament says, well, why don't you be the king? You are so great, and we love you so much. You think, oh, sycophants, yes, some serious sycophants. And yeah, he was proclaimed by Parliament to be king by legal right. The throne is vacant. We have a former king who is, what do they say at the Metropolitan Opera? Indisposed. So the former King Richard was, and you say, oh, well, then we need to get his pension work so he'll get his payments prepared. No, we don't need any of that. Thank you, though, because former king up in Pontefract, way up in North England, you can get up there by train too, on your way to Edinburgh. Yeah, you can stop here and you'll get a nice tour and see sheep, lots of sheep. You'll see lots of and buy some souvenirs. Yeah. Get those shops going. You'll be excited. But yeah, they would crown him king, and the ex-king would pass away up in Pontefract of a terrible disease called melancholia. Yes, you get it from a long melancholy. You're real sad. Actually, he was either murdered or starved to death. I'm not sure which, but melancholia sounds nicer, doesn't it? He just wept and used up all of his handkerchiefs. And it's like they just decided he had to go. And it's like, yeah, I mean, and then the truth, I mean, they couldn't just let the man sit there in the Tower of London, because as long as he's breathing, they're going to be this, we want Richard, we want, people are fickle. They'll tell you they love you. Read Machiavelli if you doubt me. I promise. And so Henry, who will become, of course, King Henry IV, is guilty of the death of Richard, if nothing else. But from the day he becomes king until the day he dies, and that will not be that many years, he will have to always hear the U word. I can only imagine. You think, what U word is that? Usurper. Yeah, you didn't say it negatively enough. You sounded too nice. You got to realize, ooh, usurper, because you're not really king. You're a usurper, because that's not nice. And I mean, that would make you have an anger fit, wouldn't it? Because that would hurt your feelings. But that's what Henry was. I mean, legally, we can go back to the family tree and see that really they were not, his family was not really the next in line. But the fact is, Henry took it. He seized it while the getting was good. And then he did away with Richard to make sure, are there any opposition? I don't hear any. No, I mean, because in Pontefract, this poor soul is starved to death. So, and he signed that abdication already. And so I guess there are no objections. I don't hear any. And yeah, I mean, it's like amazing. It's like some sort of coup d'etat in a way. And that's how the Plantagenets come to an end and how the Lancastrians began. And that's where we will start next time. Now, do we have any questions?
We have a question from the chat for first time.
Okay.
We have a chat question. How fun is that?
It's amazing. Yes, it's astounding.
Did Richard II exile Henry Bolingbroke before John the Gaunt died?
Yes, but John of Gaunt was on his
He was
deathbed.
dying.
Yeah, it was not like John of Gaunt could have done anything about it. But that's a very interesting question, because all of us do wonder, I think, whether, why would he do it when he said, Uncle John, I'm gonna do this to Henry. Well, that's not, I mean, Henry couldn't count on his father's authority. Oh, I don't think he would have dared do it back in the day. But John of Gaunt's day was long gone. So that is very helpful. Thank y'all. Thank y'all very much. And I'll see you Surfer Land next week.